Welcome, fierce souls, to a world where power isn't just taken, it's earned in blood, sweat, and the primal dance of dominance. Meet Marcus Kane, an alpha who has ruled his world with an iron fist and unwavering command for 8 years. His word is law. His presence commands instant obedience. His territory stretches across 3 states, and every wolf within it knows better than to challenge his authority. Until today. Until she walks into his domain with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine, refusing to bow, refusing to submit, refusing to acknowledge that he is the apex predator in this room. Everything he thought he knew about control is about to be shattered by a woman who sees his power and dares to say, "So what?" This is the story of an alpha who thought he was complete, until fate delivered him a mate strong enough to be his equal, brave enough to challenge him, and fierce enough to stand beside him as he learns the most dangerous lesson of all. True strength isn't about commanding others to kneel. It's about finding someone worthy of standing at your side. Chapter 1. The boardroom fell silent the moment Marcus Kane's hand touched the mahogany table. Not the polite quiet of a meeting coming to order, but the bone-deep, instinctual hush that settles over prey when a predator enters the room. Marcus didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to flash his eyes gold, or let his wolf bleed through his human facade. 8 years as alpha of the Cascade Pack had taught him that true power whispered rather than shouted, and right now, his presence alone was deafening. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown men straighten their spines and wolves expose their throats. "I believe we have a problem." 12 pairs of eyes fixed on him with the unwavering attention of pack members who understood that their alpha's displeasure was not something to weather lightly. The monthly council meeting had been proceeding smoothly until Marcus received the phone call that changed everything. "Someone," Marcus continued, moving with predatory grace around the table, "has been conducting unauthorized research into our kind. Someone with enough credentials to be taken seriously and enough resources to dig where they shouldn't be digging." Beta Thomas Reeves, Marcus's second-in-command for the past 6 years, shifted forward in his chair. "What kind of research, Alpha?" "The kind that asks uncomfortable questions about wildlife patterns in our territory. Migration routes that don't match seasonal norms. Pack behavior that's too organized, too intelligent." Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his day-old stubble. "The kind that could expose us all." A ripple of unease moved through the assembled wolves. Exposure was every pack's nightmare, the one threat that could destroy everything they'd built in the human world. The Cascade Pack controlled a vast network of businesses, from logging operations to high-end security firms, all designed to provide cover for their true nature while generating the resources needed to protect their territory. "Who is it?" asked Elena Vasquez, the pack's head of security and one of the few wolves who could match Marcus's intensity without flinching. Marcus pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. A photograph filled the screen, a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, intelligent hazel eyes focused intently on something beyond the camera's view, and an expression of such fierce concentration that it was almost predatory. "Dr. Samantha Cross," he said, and something in the way he spoke her name made every wolf in the room take notice. "Wildlife biologist with a specialty in predator behavior. She's been tracking wolf movements in our territory for 3 months, and her preliminary findings are concerning." Thomas picked up the phone, studying the image. "She's human?" "Completely." Marcus's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect if it came from anyone other than an alpha wolf. "No supernatural heritage that we can detect. Just brilliant, determined, and unfortunately thorough." "What's our play, Alpha?" Elena asked. "Do we relocate? Make her disappear? Buy her off?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Marcus's eyes flashed with warning. "We don't make people disappear, Elena. We're not monsters, despite what the old stories say." He paused, his gaze sweeping across each face at the table. "But we also can't allow her research to continue. Which means I'm going to do something I've never done before." "What's that?" Thomas asked, though the wariness in his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. Marcus straightened to his full 6'4" height, every inch of him radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly challenged. "I'm going to negotiate with her personally." "Alpha," Thomas said carefully. "With respect, your negotiation style tends to be effective but not subtle. If she's as smart as you say, she'll see right through any attempt at intimidation or manipulation," Marcus finished. "Which is why I'm going to try a different approach. I'm going to tell her the truth." The silence that followed this statement was so complete that Marcus could hear the heartbeat of every wolf in the room, some racing with anxiety, others steady with confusion. "The truth?" Elena repeated, as if the word were foreign to her. "A version of it. Enough to satisfy her scientific curiosity while protecting our secrets." Marcus moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Cascade Mountains, his territory spread out before him like a living map. "She's studying predator behavior. Well, she's about to get a masterclass from the apex predator himself." "And if she doesn't accept your negotiation?" Thomas asked. Marcus's reflection smiled in the glass, all sharp edges and dangerous promise. "Then Dr. Samantha Cross is about to learn why I've held this territory for 8 years without a single challenge to my authority." He turned back to face his pack, and in that moment, every wolf in the room was reminded why they followed him. Power radiated from Marcus like heat from a forge, not just the supernatural strength of his wolf, but the absolute certainty of a man who had never met a problem he couldn't solve or an opponent he couldn't dominate. "Meeting adjourned," he said. "Thomas, Elena, I want full backgrounds on Dr. Cross by tomorrow morning. Financial records, personal relationships, academic history, everything. If I'm going to negotiate with her, I need to know exactly who I'm dealing with." As the pack members filed out of the boardroom, Marcus remained at the window, his keen eyes tracking the movement of birds in the distance. Somewhere out in those mountains, Dr. Samantha Cross was collecting data that could destroy everything he'd built. Any other threat he would have handled with swift, decisive action, the kind that left no doubt about the consequences of crossing the Cascade Pack. But something about the woman in the photograph gave him pause. Maybe it was the intelligence burning in her eyes, or the way she held herself with the unconscious confidence of someone who had never been prey. Maybe it was the fact that she was out there alone, tracking creatures that could kill her without a second thought, driven by nothing but curiosity and scientific integrity. Or maybe it was the way his wolf had stirred restlessly the moment he'd seen her picture, a reaction he hadn't experienced in, well, ever. Marcus Kane had built his life on control of his territory, his pack, his own primal nature. He was the alpha, the protector, the final authority in a world that demanded absolute strength. He had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome or a person he couldn't read within the first 5 minutes of conversation. Dr. Samantha Cross was about to change all of that. The phone on the conference table buzzed with an incoming text. Marcus glanced at it and felt something that might have been anticipation curl in his chest. His contact at the university had confirmed Dr. Cross's field schedule. Tomorrow morning, she would be at the observation station she'd set up near Crescent Falls, alone and completely absorbed in her work. It was time to meet the woman who dared to study apex predators in their own territory. Marcus Kane was about to discover that some prey had claws of their own. Chapter 2. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers as Marcus Kane made his way through the dense undergrowth toward Crescent Falls. His footsteps were silent. A lifetime of moving through these woods had taught him how to become one with the shadows, how to approach without alerting even the most sensitive prey. But as he drew closer to Dr. Samantha Cross's observation station, Marcus began to suspect that she might not be prey at all. The scent hit him first. Not just the expected mixture of human and equipment, but something else, something that made his wolf pace restlessly beneath his skin. Confidence, intelligence, and underneath it all, a wildness that seemed impossible for someone who had never set foot in the supernatural world. He could hear her before he could see her, her voice carrying clearly through the morning air as she spoke into what he assumed was a recording device. Day 93 of observation. The pack structure in this region continues to defy conventional understanding of wolf behavior. The coordination level suggests a form of communication that goes beyond typical pack dynamics. It's almost as if Marcus stepped into the clearing, and Dr. Samantha Cross's words died mid-sentence. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they simply stared at each other. Marcus had prepared himself for this encounter, had planned his approach and his opening words with the same strategic precision he brought to every negotiation. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of Samantha Cross. The photograph had captured her intelligence and her focus, but it had failed entirely to convey the sheer force of her presence. She sat perched on a fallen log with a laptop balanced on her knees and binoculars hanging around her neck, looking for all the world like she belonged in these woods more than any human had a right to. Her auburn hair caught the morning light filtering through the canopy, and those hazel eyes, Christ, those eyes, fixed on him with a kind of direct, unflinching stare that most wolves couldn't maintain with their own alpha. "Can I help you?" she asked, and her voice carried no trace of the nervousness or intimidation that Marcus was accustomed to inspiring in humans. If anything, she sounded mildly annoyed at the interruption. Marcus felt his wolf stir with something that might have been approval or challenge. With this woman, he was beginning to suspect they might be the same thing. "Dr. Cross," he said, stepping fully into the clearing with a kind of measured confidence that had made him a legend in both the boardroom and the wilderness. "I'm Marcus Kane. I believe we have some things to discuss." She closed her laptop with a soft click, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Marcus Kane," she repeated, and something in the way she said his name suggested she recognized it. "As in Kane Industries? The logging company that owns half the mountain." Among other things. Marcus moved closer, noting the way she didn't lean back or show any sign of retreat. Most humans, hell, most wolves, would have at least shifted position when faced with his approach. Dr. Cross simply watched him with the steady patience of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. "Let me guess," she said, rising to her feet with fluid grace that spoke of someone comfortable in her own body. "You're here to tell me that my research is trespassing on private property, and I need to pack up my little science project and find somewhere else to play." The dismissive way she said "little science project" made Marcus's jaw tighten. "Your research is hardly little, doctor. In fact, it's quite impressive. Thorough. Detailed." He paused, letting his gaze travel over her setup, the sophisticated equipment, the meticulously organized notes, the evidence of someone who had been living rough in the wilderness for months, without complaint. Potentially dangerous. That got her attention. Sam. He found himself thinking of her as Sam, though he couldn't say why, tilted her head with the kind of curiosity that had probably gotten her into trouble more than once. "Dangerous how?" she asked. "I'm studying wildlife patterns. Last I checked, that wasn't considered a high-risk occupation." "It is when the wildlife you're studying isn't quite what it appears to be." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that Marcus hoped she was smart enough to decode. He watched as her scientific mind began working, analyzing his statement from every angle. "You're suggesting that there's something unusual about the wolf population in this region," she said slowly. "Something that goes beyond normal pack behavior." "I'm suggesting that there are aspects of the local ecosystem that might be better left unexplored. For your own safety." Sam laughed, and the sound was nothing like the nervous titter Marcus usually heard from humans who found themselves alone with him in the wilderness. It was rich and genuine and completely unafraid. "Mr. Kane," she said, "I've been tracking apex predators for 8 years. I've been charged by grizzly bears, stalked by mountain lions, and once had a very uncomfortable encounter with a pack of coyotes who thought I looked like dinner. The local wolves, impressive as they are, don't particularly concern me. They should." The simple statement, delivered with absolute certainty, finally seemed to penetrate her scientific confidence. Sam studied his face, and Marcus could practically see her brilliant mind cataloging details, his height and build, the way he moved through the forest without making a sound, the unconscious authority in his voice that suggested he was used to being obeyed without question. "You know something," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, could smell the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with wood smoke and morning air. Close enough that most people would feel crowded, intimidated, overwhelmed by his physical presence. Sam held her ground. "I know that you've documented behavioral patterns that could be misinterpreted," he said carefully. "I know that your research could attract the wrong kind of attention from people who might not have your best interests at heart. And I know that continuing this particular line of inquiry could put you in danger that you're not equipped to handle." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Kane?" The question was asked with such calm directness that it caught Marcus off guard. He was used to people dancing around him, speaking in the kind of deferential tones that acknowledged his position without forcing him to state it explicitly. Sam Cross looked at him like he was exactly what he appeared to be, a very large, very confident man who had interrupted her workday. "I'm offering to protect you," he said, and something in his own voice surprised him. The words carried more weight than he'd intended, more promise than a simple business proposition should have held. From what, exactly? Marcus found himself in the unprecedented position of wanting to tell her the truth. All of it. The supernatural world that existed parallel to her scientific reality, the pack that moved through these mountains with intelligence and purpose that no ordinary wolves could possess, the fact that he himself was the apex predator she'd been unknowingly studying. Instead, he said, from becoming a problem that other people might feel compelled to solve. Sam was quiet for a long moment, her gaze never leaving his face. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of steel that made his wolf sit up and take notice. "Mr. Kane, I appreciate your concern, but I don't need protection. I need data. And if there's something unusual about the wolf population in this region, something that you clearly know about, then I need to understand what that is. And if I told you that some questions are better left unanswered, then I'd tell you that you don't know me very well." Sam picked up her laptop and slid it into a waterproof case with practiced efficiency. "I'm a scientist, Mr. Kane. Unanswered questions aren't obstacles to avoid, they're puzzles to solve." She moved toward him, and for the first time in 8 years as Alpha, Marcus Kane found himself stepping back. Not from intimidation or fear, but from something far more dangerous, the recognition that he was facing someone who might actually be his equal. "Thank you for the warning," Sam said as she passed him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "But I'll take my chances with whatever's out here. It can't be any more dangerous than some of the corporate predators I've dealt with." She paused at the edge of the clearing, glancing back with a smile that was part challenge, part invitation, and entirely devastating. "Besides," she added, "I have a feeling that the most dangerous predator in these woods is standing right behind me." And with that, Dr. Samantha Cross disappeared into the forest, leaving Marcus Kane alone in the clearing with the unsettling realization that for the first time in his life, he had encountered someone who was completely unimpressed by his power. His wolf prowled restlessly beneath his skin, torn between the urge to follow her and the need to understand what had just happened. Marcus had come here to intimidate, negotiate, or neutralize a threat to his pack. Instead, he'd found himself intrigued, challenged, and completely out of his depth. Dr. Samantha Cross wasn't just studying apex predators. She was one. Chapter 3. Marcus Kane had been back in his office for exactly 43 minutes, and he still couldn't concentrate on the quarterly reports spread across his desk. Every time he tried to focus on profit margins and resource allocation, his mind wandered back to a pair of hazel eyes that had looked at him like he was nothing more than an interesting specimen to be cataloged and filed away. The intercom buzzed. "Alpha." Thomas's voice carried the careful neutrality that meant he had news Marcus wasn't going to like. "Come in." Thomas entered carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of a man who wished he were anywhere else. "We have a problem." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, fighting the urge to let his frustration bleed through. "Let me guess. Dr. Cross didn't pack up her equipment and disappear into the night after our conversation." "Quite the opposite." Thomas set the tablet on Marcus's desk, the screen displaying a series of time-stamped photographs.
"She's doubled down."
Set up motion-activated cameras at 3 new locations, expanded her observation grid by another 2 miles, and according to our contacts at the university, she just requested funding for an extended study. Marcus studied the images, each one showing Samantha moving through the forest with a kind of purposeful efficiency that spoke of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. In one photo, she was crouched beside a stream, taking water samples. In another, she was measuring what appeared to be paw prints in the mud, her face set in lines of intense concentration. "How long has she been at this today?" Marcus asked, though something told him he already knew the answer. "She was back in the field before dawn. Elena's been tracking her movements, discreetly, of course. The woman doesn't seem to need sleep." Marcus felt his wolf stir with what he was beginning to recognize as a dangerous combination of admiration and territorial possessiveness. Most humans who encountered him left the mountains within hours, if not immediately. Dr. Samantha Cross had responded to his warning by essentially declaring war on his attempts to control the situation. "There's more," Thomas continued, his voice dropping into the tone reserved for truly bad news. "She's not alone anymore." Every muscle in Marcus's body went rigid. "Explain." Research assistant arrived this morning. Graduate student named Jake Morrison specializes in wildlife photography. Young, eager, and completely clueless about what he's walking into. Thomas pulled up another image on the tablet, a lanky young man with expensive camera equipment and the kind of enthusiasm that could get people killed in the wrong circumstances. Shit. Marcus was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, pacing to the window with the restless energy of a caged predator. 2 humans in his territory was exponentially more complicated than one, especially if one of them was inexperienced in wilderness survival. "It gets worse," Thomas said quietly. "Jake Morrison isn't just any graduate student. He's the son of Senator Morrison. You know, the one who's been pushing for expanded federal oversight of private land use in the Northwest." Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop as his control slipped just enough to let his supernatural nature bleed through. Ice crystals began forming on the window where his breath hit the glass. "So now we have a brilliant scientist who's too stubborn to be intimidated, and a politically connected kid who could bring federal attention down on us if anything happens to him." Marcus turned back to his beta, and Thomas actually took a step backward at the expression on his alpha's face. "Perfect. What are your orders, Alpha?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to end this threat decisively, relocate the humans, alter their memories, do whatever was necessary to protect the pack. But every time he started to formulate that plan, he saw Samantha's face in his mind, heard her voice telling him that unanswered questions weren't obstacles to avoid. "Double the perimeter patrols," he said finally. "I want eyes on both humans at all times, but stay invisible. If either of them gets so much as a scratch, I want to know about it immediately. And if they get too close to pack members? If they witness something they shouldn't." Marcus moved back to his desk, but instead of sitting down, he leaned against it with deceptive casualness. "Then we improvise." "But Thomas?" He waited until his beta met his eyes. "No one, and I mean no one, touches Dr. Cross or her assistant without my explicit permission. Are we clear?" "Crystal, Alpha. But may I ask why we're taking such a hands-off approach?" "This level of exposure risk is manageable," Marcus finished, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. "Dr. Cross isn't some random hiker who stumbled into something she shouldn't have seen. She's a professional with resources and connections. If she disappears or has an accident, people will ask questions. People with the kind of authority to make our lives very complicated." It was a reasonable explanation, and Thomas nodded with a kind of understanding that came from 6 years of serving as Marcus's second-in-command. But it wasn't the complete truth, and they both knew it. The complete truth was that Marcus couldn't shake the memory of standing in that clearing, facing a woman who looked at him without fear or deference, who challenged him with a kind of fearless intelligence that his wolf recognized as something rare and precious. The complete truth was that somewhere between her dismissive smile and her parting shot about dangerous predators, Dr. Samantha Cross had gotten under his skin in a way that no one had managed in 8 years of leadership. The complete truth was that Marcus Kane, alpha of the Cascade Pack, was fascinated by a human woman who saw him as nothing more than a corporate predator in an expensive suit. "There's something else," Thomas said, interrupting Marcus's uncomfortable self-reflection. Elena intercepted some communications from Dr. Cross's university. Apparently, her preliminary findings have attracted attention from some federal agencies. Fish and wildlife, primarily, but there are also some inquiries from groups we can't identify. Marcus felt his wolf go completely still, the way it did when faced with a threat that required absolute focus. What kind of groups? The kind that don't advertise their existence on government websites. Elena's working on it, but so far all we know is that someone with serious resources has been asking questions about unusual wildlife activity in the Pacific Northwest. The pieces of a much larger puzzle began falling into place in Marcus's mind. Dr. Cross's research hadn't just attracted the attention of the local pack, it had sent ripples through networks that most humans didn't even know existed. The supernatural world had its own version of federal oversight, organizations that monitored and controlled interactions between the human and paranormal communities. If those groups decided that the Cascade Pack represented a security risk, how long do we have? Marcus asked. Unknown. Elena estimates we have maybe a week, possibly 2, before whatever federal attention Dr. Cross has attracted translates into boots on the ground. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting into the kind of strategic thinking that had kept his pack safe and prosperous for 8 years. But underneath the tactical planning, his wolf was focused on something else entirely, the need to protect Samantha Cross from threats she didn't even know existed. "I want everything we can get on these federal inquiries," he said. "Financial trails, communication intercepts, personnel records, whatever Elena needs to access, she has my full authorization. And I want a complete background workup on Jake Morrison, not just his academic credentials. Family connections, financial situation, anyone who might have a reason to use him as leverage." Understood. And Dr. Cross? Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering the way she'd looked at him in the forest, like she could see right through every carefully constructed facade to the predator beneath. Like she wasn't impressed by what she found there. "Dr. Cross is my responsibility," he said finally. "I'll handle her personally." Thomas nodded and headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. "Alpha? For what it's worth, I think you made the right call this morning." A direct confrontation would have only made her more suspicious. After Thomas left, Marcus stood alone in his office, looking out at the mountains that had been his domain for 8 years. Somewhere out there, Dr. Samantha Cross was collecting data that could expose everything he'd built, accompanied by a young man whose disappearance could bring federal heat down on the pack. The smart play would be to neutralize the threat quietly and efficiently. Make the humans disappear, alter any records of their research, and return to the careful balance between the human and supernatural worlds that had served the pack so well. But Marcus found himself thinking about the way Samantha had smiled when she'd called him the most dangerous predator in the woods. Like she was issuing a challenge rather than making an observation. Like she wanted to see if he was dangerous enough to be worthy of her attention. His phone buzzed with a text message from Elena, motion sensors triggered. Dr. Cross and assistant heading toward the old logging road. Something spooked them. Marcus was moving before he'd consciously decided to respond, grabbing his keys and heading for the door with the kind of urgency that his wolf reserved for threats to the pack. But as he drove through the winding mountain roads toward whatever had sent Samantha running, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't responding to a threat. He was answering a call. Dr. Samantha Cross had spent 3 months studying apex predators in his territory. Now she was about to discover that the most dangerous one had been studying her right back. And unlike her scientific observations, this hunt was about to become very, very personal. Chapter 4. Marcus found them 3 miles down the old logging road, and the scene that greeted him made his blood turn to ice in his veins. Samantha's Jeep sat abandoned with both doors hanging open, equipment scattered in the dirt around it like the aftermath of a struggle. Jake Morrison crouched behind the vehicle, his expensive camera clutched to his chest, and his face pale with the kind of terror that came from encountering something that shouldn't exist. But it was Samantha who commanded Marcus's attention. She stood 20 feet from the Jeep, perfectly still, her hands raised in the universal gesture of non-aggression. Facing her, close enough that she could see the intelligence burning in its yellow eyes, was the largest wolf Marcus had ever encountered outside of his own pack. The rogue. Marcus shifted out of his truck with predatory silence, every sense on high alert as he assessed the situation. The wolf, easily 200 pounds of muscle and fury, had the distinctive markings that Elena's security team had been tracking for weeks. A lone male, cast out from some northern pack for crimes unknown, who had been testing the boundaries of Cascade territory for the past month. "Nobody move," Samantha said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made Marcus's wolf sit up and take notice. "Jake, whatever you do, don't run. Wolves are pursuit predators. Running will only trigger his chase instinct." The rogues had swiveled toward the sound of her voice, and Marcus saw its lips pull back in a silent snarl. This wasn't a curious wildlife encounter or a case of mistaken territorial boundaries. The rogue was evaluating Samantha as prey, and from the tension in its powerful haunches, it was preparing to strike. Marcus moved with the fluid speed that 8 years as an alpha had honed to perfection. One moment he was beside his truck, the next he was placing himself between Samantha and 200 pounds of hostile wolf, his presence announcing itself with the kind of authority that made every wild creature in the forest freeze. The rogue's reaction was immediate and visceral. It dropped into a submissive crouch so fast that Marcus almost felt sorry for it, whimpering with the high, desperate sound that wolves made when faced with a predator so far above them in the hierarchy that resistance wasn't even considered. "Holy shit," Jake whispered from behind the Jeep. "Did that thing just bow to you?" Marcus ignored the question, his attention focused entirely on the rogue. With movements that were more wolf than human, he advanced on the intruder, every line of his body radiating the kind of dominance that needed no explanation. The message was clear. "This is my territory. These are under my protection. Leave. Now." The rogue needed no translation. With a final whimper of submission, it turned and disappeared into the undergrowth, moving with the desperate speed of an animal that had just encountered something far more dangerous than itself. Only then did Marcus turn to face Samantha, and what he saw in her expression made his wolf go completely still. She wasn't looking at him with the relief or gratitude that he might have expected from someone who had just been saved from a potentially lethal encounter. Instead, her hazel eyes were bright with scientific curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like excitement. "That," she said, her voice breathless with discovery, "was absolutely fascinating." Marcus stared at her. Fascinating. The behavioral dynamics, the pack hierarchy implications. Did you see how that wolf's entire demeanor changed the moment you arrived? It went from predator to submissive in less than 3 seconds. "I've never seen anything like it, Dr. Cross," Marcus said carefully. "You were almost killed by a 200-pound wolf, and your first reaction is to analyze the encounter for scientific data?" Samantha finally seemed to register the concern in his voice, and her expression softened slightly. "I wasn't in any real danger. I know how to handle myself around large predators, Mr. Kane. The key is to avoid direct eye contact, make yourself appear larger, and whatever you do, don't show fear." "That wolf was preparing to attack you," Marcus said, his voice carrying more heat than he'd intended. Another 30 seconds and I would have used the bear spray in my belt," Samantha interrupted. "Or Jake would have made enough noise with that camera to scare it off. We had contingency plans." Marcus looked at the scattered equipment, the abandoned vehicle, Jake Morrison's still pale face, and wondered what planet this woman was from that she considered a rogue wolf encounter a manageable research opportunity. "Your contingency plans," he said slowly, "involved bear spray and camera noise. Among other things, yes. Against a wolf that size. Wolves are actually quite risk-averse when it comes to potential injury. A face full of capsaicin and loud noises would have been more than enough to..." Samantha stopped mid-explanation, her head tilting as she studied his face. "You're angry." It wasn't a question, and the observation caught Marcus off guard. He was angry, furious, actually, but not for the reasons she probably thought. The rage burning in his chest had nothing to do with her research or her trespassing on packed territory, and everything to do with the image of her standing defenseless in front of a rogue wolf that could have torn her apart without effort. "I'm concerned," he corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. "This area has been experiencing increased predator activity lately. Large, aggressive animals that aren't behaving according to normal patterns." "You mean like the wolf that just treated you like its pack alpha?" Samantha asked, and there was something in her tone that made Marcus's wolf go very, very still. "I have experience with wildlife management," he said carefully. "I'm sure you do." Samantha moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the adrenaline still coursing through her system, could see the gold flecks in her eyes that seemed to catch and hold the afternoon sunlight. "But what I just witnessed went beyond wildlife management, Mr. Kane. That wolf didn't just retreat because you scared it. It submitted to you like you were something it recognized." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, the careful balance between his human facade and his wolf nature threatening to crumble under the weight of her intelligent scrutiny. "You're reading too much into a simple territorial display." "Am I?" Samantha was close enough now that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, could hear the slight breathlessness that suggested her scientific excitement was being complicated by other factors. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like that wolf saw you as its natural superior. Like you were speaking a language it understood on a level that had nothing to do with human wildlife management techniques." The silence that stretched between them was loaded with possibilities that Marcus didn't dare explore. Behind them, Jake Morrison was finally emerging from his hiding spot, camera in hand and questions written all over his face. But Marcus's attention was entirely focused on the woman standing close enough to touch, looking at him like she was on the verge of a discovery that could change everything. "Dr. Cross," he said, his voice dropping into the register he usually reserved for pack negotiations, "there are things in these mountains that your scientific training hasn't prepared you for. Dangers that go beyond what you can read in journals or study in controlled environments." "Then teach me," she said simply, and the words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "If there's something I need to understand about this ecosystem, something that could help me conduct my research more safely, then I want to learn it." Marcus stared at her, caught between the impossible desire to pull her into his world and the absolute necessity of protecting the pack's secrets. She was standing close enough that he could see the pulse beating at the base of her throat, could hear the way her breathing had changed as the adrenaline from the wolf encounter mixed with something else entirely. "Some lessons," he said quietly, "are more dangerous than the problems they solve." "And some problems," Samantha replied, her gaze never leaving his face, "can't be solved without accepting a little danger." "Hey!" Jake's voice cut through the tension like a knife, reminding both of them that they weren't alone in the forest. "Sorry to interrupt whatever this is, but shouldn't we be calling someone? Park Service, wildlife management, somebody official? That thing was huge, and if there are more of them out there." Marcus saw Samantha's expression shift as she remembered her research partner, the scientific mindset reasserting itself over whatever had been building between them. But when she turned to address Jake's concerns, she positioned herself close enough to Marcus that her shoulder almost brushed his arm, as if she was unconsciously seeking the protection of his presence. "Jake's right," she said, though something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely happy about the interruption. "We should report the encounter, update our safety protocols, and we need to check the equipment, make sure nothing was damaged." Marcus watched her shift back into professional mode, but he didn't miss the way her eyes kept returning to his face, or the way she seemed reluctant to move away from him. The wolf encounter had changed something between them, created a crack in the careful distance she'd been maintaining. "I'll make the appropriate calls," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "My company maintains close relationships with all the local wildlife agencies. They'll want a full report." "Of course they will," Samantha said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she understood far more about his company relationships than she was letting on. As Jake began gathering the scattered equipment and Samantha made notes in her field journal, Marcus stepped away to make the calls that would ensure the rogue wolf's encounter with humans was properly documented and contained. But even as he spoke with Elena about cleanup protocols and damage control, his attention remained fixed on the woman who had just faced down a killer predator with nothing but bear spray and scientific curiosity. Dr. Samantha Cross was going to be the death of him, or his salvation. Marcus was beginning to suspect they might be the same thing. Chapter 5. The emergency PAC meeting convened at midnight in the conference room of Kane Industries, but Marcus's mind was still 3 miles down an old logging road, replaying the moment when Samantha Cross had looked at him like she was seeing him, truly seeing him, for the first time. The rogue situation is contained, Elena reported, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency that made her invaluable as head of security. I've spoken with our contacts in fish and wildlife. The incident will be filed as a routine encounter with an unusually large male wolf, relocated to avoid future human contact. And Dr. Cross's research partner? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. Jake Morrison spent the afternoon posting on every social media platform he has access to, Thomas said grimly, sliding a tablet across the table. Pictures, videos, a detailed account of the encounter that makes it sound like he personally wrestled a dire wolf. Marcus scrolled through the posts, his jaw tightening with each dramatic retelling. The photos were actually impressive. Jake had managed to capture several clear images of the rogue in the moments before Marcus arrived. But it was the captions that worried him. Massive wolf in Cascade Mountains defies normal behavior. Research expedition documents unprecedented wildlife encounter. More to come. How many followers? Marcus asked. Jake personally? About 3,000, mostly fellow students and outdoor enthusiasts. But his posts have been shared over 50,000 times in the past 6 hours. One of the photos made it onto a popular cryptozoology forum, and there's already speculation about supernatural wolf behavior. Marcus felt his wolf pace restlessly beneath his skin. Social media was the modern equivalent of town criers, capable of spreading information or misinformation at a speed that could expose the supernatural world faster than any government investigation. Can we contain it? I'm working on it, Elena said. I've got people seeding the forums with rational explanations, debunking the more dramatic claims. But the photos are real, Marcus. Good quality, clearly showing a wolf that's significantly larger than normal parameters. We can discredit the story, but we can't erase the evidence. And Dr. Cross? Marcus asked, though something in his tone made every wolf in the room go very still. What's her take on her assistant's social media adventure? Thomas and Elena exchanged a look that Marcus didn't like at all. That's complicated, Thomas said carefully. According to our monitoring, she spent most of the evening trying to convince Morrison to take the posts down. Apparently, she's concerned about the impact on their research credibility. But, Marcus prompted, because there was definitely a but coming. But she also spent 3 hours on encrypted video calls with contacts at various universities and research institutions. Elena couldn't crack the encryption, but the timing suggests she was sharing today's findings with people who have the resources to act on them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the mahogany table in a rhythm that matched his wolf's agitated pacing. She's calling in reinforcements. That would be my assessment, yes, Elena confirmed. If I had a guess, Dr. Cross suspects that what happened today was the tip of a much larger iceberg, and she wants expert backup before she digs deeper. How long do we have? Academic bureaucracy moves slowly, even in crisis mode, Thomas said. Maybe a week before anyone else arrives on scene. 2 weeks before any kind of formal investigation team could be assembled. Unless her mysterious federal contacts decide to accelerate the timeline, Elena added. In which case, all bets are off. Marcus rose from his chair and moved to the windows, looking out at the city lights that twinkled below the mountain headquarters. Somewhere out there, Dr. Samantha Cross was probably still awake, analyzing data and formulating theories that were far too close to the truth for his PAC's safety. Options, he said without turning around. Relocation, Elena said immediately. We disappear the humans, scatter the pack to secondary territories, and wait for the attention to die down. It's drastic, but it's clean. Memory alteration, Thomas suggested. Risky, but possible. We bring in specialists, scrub the encounter from their minds, plant false memories of a routine research trip. Or we bring her in, said a voice from the doorway, and Marcus turned to see Rebecca Kane, his sister and the pack's chief medical officer, entering the conference room with a kind of quiet confidence that came from being the Alpha's blood family. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately, his voice carrying enough authority to make most wolves step back. Rebecca, however, had been dealing with her brother's dominance displays since they were children, and she wasn't impressed. Marcus, be practical, she said, taking a seat at the table with easy familiarity. Dr. Cross has already seen too much to be safely relocated or memory wiped. She's too smart, too well-connected, and frankly too stubborn to be managed through traditional channels. So, your solution is to expose her to pack secrets? Marcus asked, his tone carrying a warning that Rebecca ignored completely. My solution is to consider the possibility that fate put her in our territory for a reason, Rebecca replied calmly. You said yourself that she's brilliant, fearless, and completely unafraid of apex predators. Those aren't exactly common traits in humans. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Dr. Samantha Cross is exactly what this pack needs. Someone with the scientific background to help us navigate the increasing scrutiny we're facing from the human world, and the strength of character to be trusted with our secrets. The room fell into the kind of silence that followed Rebecca's more provocative statements. As the pack's medical officer, she was responsible for everything from treating injuries to conducting the genetic research that helped them understand their own supernatural nature. Her scientific perspective was invaluable, but it also led her to conclusions that made the rest of the pack nervous. You want to trust a human with the existence of werewolves, Marcus said slowly, based on the fact that she doesn't run away from dangerous situations. I want to trust a human who spent 3 months documenting supernatural behavior with scientific precision, stood her ground when faced with a rogue wolf, and looked at you like she could see straight through to your wolf. Rebecca paused, her expression softening slightly. Marcus, I've watched you maintain perfect control over your human facade for 8 years. Today, for the first time since you became Alpha, that control slipped. She affects you in ways that go beyond pack politics or territorial protection. Marcus felt every pair of eyes in the room focused on him, waiting for his response to his sister's uncomfortable observations. The truth was that Rebecca was right. Samantha Cross had gotten under his skin in a way that defied rational explanation. But acknowledging that fact in front of his pack felt like admitting to a weakness that could undermine everything he'd built. My personal reactions to Dr. Cross are irrelevant, he said finally. The pack's safety is the only consideration that matters. And if she's the key to ensuring that safety? Rebecca pressed. If bringing her into our world is the difference between exposure and protection? Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made his blood turn to ice. Mr. Kane, we need to talk. There are things about today's encounter that don't add up, and I think you know more than you're telling me. I'll be at Crescent Falls at dawn.
Come alone.
S. Cross. Marcus stared at the message, his wolf stirring with a mixture of anticipation and concern that was becoming disturbingly familiar. Samantha Cross wasn't just calling in academic reinforcements, she was calling him out directly, demanding answers to questions that could destroy everything he'd spent 8 years protecting. Problem? Thomas asked, noting the change in Marcus's expression. Marcus handed him the phone, watching as his beta's face went through the same range of emotions that Marcus was still processing. She knows, Thomas said quietly. Maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. Or enough to be useful, Rebecca added, reading the message over Thomas's shoulder. Marcus, she's giving you an opportunity here. A chance to control the narrative before she starts digging for answers in places that could expose us to much worse than academic curiosity. Marcus took back his phone, reading Samantha's message again. The tone was professional, but there was something underneath it, a challenge, An invitation, a recognition that whatever was building between them had moved beyond simple territorial negotiations. Come alone. She wasn't just asking for information. She was asking for trust. The question was whether Marcus Kane, alpha of the Cascade Pack, was brave enough to give it to her. Meeting adjourned, he said, his voice carrying the finality that ended all pack discussions. I'll handle Dr. Cross personally. As the pack members filed out of the conference room, Rebecca lingered behind, her expression carrying the kind of sisterly concern that bypassed all pack hierarchies. Marcus, she said quietly, whatever you decide about Dr. Cross, make sure you're deciding as an alpha, not as a man who's been alone too long. After she left, Marcus stood alone in the empty conference room, looking out at the mountains that held both his pack and the woman who threatened to change everything. In 6 hours, he would meet Samantha Cross at Crescent Falls, and he would have to decide whether to trust her with secrets that could destroy them all. The smart play was to maintain the lie, deflect her questions, and find a way to neutralize the threat she represented. But as Marcus imagined facing those intelligent hazel eyes at dawn, he found himself wondering if the smartest play was the one his wolf was demanding, to bare his throat to a woman who might be the only human alive strong enough to accept him as he truly was. Dr. Samantha Cross wanted answers. Marcus Kane was about to give them to her. Chapter 6. Dawn at Crescent Falls painted the world in shades of gold and mist, but Marcus Kane barely noticed the beauty surrounding him. He'd been standing beside the waterfall for 20 minutes, every sense heightened as he waited for a woman who was about to change the course of his life, one way or another. The sound of approaching footsteps announced her arrival, and Marcus turned to see Samantha emerge from the forest path with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a decision and intended to see it through. She wore practical hiking clothes and carried a thermos of coffee, looking for all the world like she was heading to a routine research meeting rather than a confrontation that could expose the supernatural world. "Thank you for coming," she said, stopping just close enough to be conversational, but far enough away to maintain her independence. "I wasn't sure you would." "You made it clear that this conversation was inevitable," Marcus replied, studying her face in the early morning light. "I prefer to choose the time and place for my inevitabilities." Samantha smiled, and something about the expression made his wolf stir restlessly. That sounds like something a man who's used to being in control would say. "Control is important in my line of work." "And what exactly is your line of work, Mr. Kane?" Samantha moved to a large boulder beside the falls and sat down with easy grace, gesturing for him to join her. "Because yesterday taught me that your business involves more than logging and land management." Marcus remained standing, using his height advantage to maintain some semblance of authority in a conversation where he already felt completely out of his depth. "What did yesterday teach you, Dr. Cross?" "It taught me that you have an unusual relationship with the local wildlife. It taught me that a 200-pound wolf recognized you as something more than just another human in its territory. And it taught me that you've been watching my research far more closely than any normal businessman would have reason to." She pulled out her tablet, swiping through what appeared to be data files and photographs. "It also taught me that my 3 months of observations have documented behavioral patterns that don't match anything in the existing literature on wolf pack dynamics, such as coordination levels that suggest complex communication systems, territory markers that appear in locations no ordinary wolf could access, and yesterday a lone wolf that submitted to you like you were its natural alpha." Samantha looked up from her tablet, her hazel eyes sharp with scientific curiosity. "Want to explain that to me?" Marcus felt the familiar weight of leadership settle across his shoulders, the burden of making decisions that would affect not just himself, but everyone who depended on him for protection. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to deflect, misdirect, and find a way to end this conversation without compromising the pack's safety. But as he looked at Samantha Cross, brilliant, fearless, and completely unafraid to demand answers from a man who could snap her in half without effort, Marcus found himself making a choice that went against 8 years of careful paranoia. "What if I told you that everything you think you know about the natural world is incomplete?" he said, moving to sit beside her on the boulder. What if I told you that there are predators in these mountains that are more than they appear to be? Samantha was quiet for a moment, her scientific mind clearly working through the implications of his words. I'd say that my research has already suggested as much. The question is what, exactly, they are, and whether you're one of them. The directness of her statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his careful planning for this conversation, he hadn't anticipated that she would simply ask the question outright, forcing him to choose between an outright lie and a truth that could destroy everything. Why do you want to know? He asked instead. Because I'm a scientist and scientists need answers. Because I've spent 3 months documenting impossible behavior patterns that suggest there's an entire ecosystem here that I don't understand. And because... She paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. Because yesterday, when you stepped between me and that wolf, I felt safer than I've ever felt in my life. Even though every rational part of my brain was screaming that you were the most dangerous thing in that forest. Marcus stared at her, caught between the impossibility of her acceptance and the terrifying vulnerability of being truly seen by another person. What if you're right? What if I am the most dangerous thing in these mountains? Then I'd want to understand what that means, Samantha said simply. For my research for the ecosystem, and for... She met his eyes directly. For whatever this is between us. The acknowledgement of the attraction that had been building between them hung in the air like morning mist, impossible to ignore and dangerous to explore. Marcus felt his carefully maintained control wavering under the weight of her trust, her curiosity, and the simple fact that she was offering him something he'd never had before, acceptance, without conditions. Samantha, he said, her name feeling strange and right on his tongue, what I'm about to tell you could put you in danger. Not just from the government agencies that monitor supernatural activity, but from members of my own community who might see your knowledge as a threat. Supernatural activity, she repeated, and there was no mockery in her tone, only the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for analyzing data. So, I was right. You're not entirely human. Marcus felt the last of his resistance crumble under the matter-of-fact way she stated what should have been an impossible conclusion. No, he said quietly. I'm not. He stood up and moved away from her, needing distance for what came next. What you've been documenting in your research isn't unusual wolf behavior, Samantha. It's werewolf behavior. The pack dynamics, the territory markers, the coordination levels, they're all evidence of an organized community that exists parallel to the human world. Marcus turned to face her, letting his control slip just enough to allow his supernatural nature to bleed through. His eyes flashed gold in the morning light, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. I am Marcus Kane, Alpha of the Cascade Pack, he said, his voice carrying the resonance that made every wolf within 50 miles recognize his authority. I am the apex predator you've been studying, and everything you've observed over the past 3 months has been my pack living our lives under your microscope. Samantha was perfectly still for a long moment, her scientific mind clearly processing information that should have been impossible to accept. But when she finally spoke, her words weren't what Marcus had expected. How many? She asked. How many what? How many werewolves are in your pack? How large is the territory you're protecting? And are there other packs in the region that I should know about? Marcus stared at her, completely unprepared for her practical response to learning about the existence of the supernatural world. You're not afraid? Skeptical? Demanding proof? Samantha stood up and walked over to him, stopping close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, could smell the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with morning air. Marcus, I've spent 3 months documenting behavior that defied every textbook I've ever read. I've watched wolves coordinate hunts with military precision, establish territory markers in locations that required human-level intelligence to access, and maintain pack structures that shouldn't be possible without complex language skills. She reached out and touched his arm, and Marcus felt his wolf go completely still at the contact. Yesterday, I watched a massive predator submit to you like you were something it recognized on a primal level. And last night, I spent hours trying to find rational explanations for observations that could only be explained by accepting that the wolves I've been studying aren't entirely wolves. So you believe me, Marcus said, and something in his voice suggested that her answer was more important than just academic curiosity. I believe the evidence of my own observations, Samantha replied. And those observations tell me that you're exactly what you say you are. She paused, her hand still warm against his arm. The question is, what happens now? Marcus covered her hand with his own, marveling at how small and fragile it seemed compared to his supernatural strength. Now you have a choice to make. You can walk away, return to your research at other locations, and pretend this conversation never happened. Or you can help me protect something that's more important than any scientific discovery. My pack, Samantha. 63 werewolves who have built lives and families and careers in the human world, who trust me to keep them safe from exposure and persecution. Marcus turned her hand over in his, studying the calluses that spoke of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work, the steady pulse that suggested she wasn't as calm as she appeared. But if you choose to stay, to help us, you'll be accepting risks that go far beyond anything your scientific training has prepared you for. Samantha was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from their joined hands to his face, and Marcus could practically see her brilliant mind working through possibilities and consequences. These government agencies you mentioned, she said finally, the ones that monitor supernatural activity, are they the reason you're so concerned about my research attracting attention? Among others. The supernatural world has its own version of federal oversight, organizations that exist to maintain the balance between human and paranormal communities. If they decide that my pack represents a security risk because of your documentation, they'll eliminate the risk, Samantha finished. Along with anyone who has knowledge of it. The people I care about, yes. Samantha looked out at the waterfall, her expression thoughtful. When she finally turned back to him, her hazel eyes held a determination that made his wolf sit up and take notice. 63 people, she said. Families. Children? 12 children under the age of 16, Marcus confirmed. Families who have lived in this territory for generations, businesses that support the entire local economy, lives that have been built on the assumption that they could exist safely in both worlds. And you're responsible for all of them. I'm their alpha. Their protection is my life. Samantha nodded slowly, and Marcus could see the moment when she made her decision. Then I guess we'd better figure out how to keep them safe. The simple statement hit Marcus with more force than any declaration of love could have managed. She wasn't just accepting the existence of werewolves, she was accepting responsibility for their protection, aligning herself with his most fundamental duty as alpha. Samantha, he said, his voice rough with emotions he wasn't sure how to express, you don't understand what you're agreeing to. I understand that there are 63 people whose lives depend on maintaining a secret that my research threatens to expose, she replied. I understand that you've trusted me with knowledge that could destroy everything you've built. And I understand that if there's a way to use my scientific background to help protect your pack, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he had to look down to maintain eye contact. Besides, Mr. Kane, Marcus, I've spent my entire career studying apex predators. I've always wondered what it would be like to work with one instead of just observing from a distance. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him, a recognition that went deeper than attraction or professional respect. Looking at Samantha Cross in the golden morning light, he saw not just a brilliant scientist or a potential threat, but a woman strong enough to stand beside him as an equal. His wolf stirred with approval, and for the first time in 8 years, Marcus Kane allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to share the burden of leadership with someone who understood the weight of protecting others. Welcome to the pack, Dr. Cross, he said, and bent his head to seal the agreement with a kiss that tasted like morning coffee and new beginnings. Chapter 7. The pack house had never felt smaller to Marcus than it did watching Samantha Cross walk through his most private sanctuary for the first time. She moved through the expansive living room with the same focused attention she brought to everything else, taking in the details that spoke of a life built around accommodating both human and wolf needs. The ceiling height, she observed, running her fingers along the custom woodwork that soared 12 feet above them. It's designed to make someone your size feel comfortable even when you're larger, isn't it? Marcus nodded, still adjusting to the surreal experience of having a human in his personal space who understood exactly what she was seeing. The entire house is built to supernatural specifications. Reinforced walls, soundproofing, spaces that can accommodate rapid shifts between forms. And this. Samantha stopped in front of the massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall, its hearth large enough to comfortably accommodate several people. Pack meetings, Marcus explained, moving to stand beside her. In the old days, wolves would gather around fires for warmth and protection. Some traditions adapt better than others to modern life. He watched her absorb this information with the same scientific curiosity she'd shown when he'd revealed his supernatural nature, but there was something else in her expression now, a softness that suggested she was seeing not just the functional aspects of his world, but the emotional significance behind them. "It must get lonely," she said quietly, "being responsible for so many people while living apart from them." The observation hit closer to home than Marcus was comfortable acknowledging. Alphas maintain distance to preserve objectivity. It's easier to make difficult decisions when personal attachments don't complicate the equation. "Is that why you've never taken a mate?" Samantha asked, and something in her tone made his wolf go very still. Marcus turned to study her profile, noting the way her cheeks had colored slightly at her own boldness. "How do you know I haven't?" "Because everything about this house screams solitary occupant. One coffee cup in the sink, one place setting on the counter, one pillow on a king-sized bed that's clearly meant for sharing." She met his eyes directly. "And because the way you kissed me this morning didn't feel like it came from someone who has practiced sharing intimacy." The frank assessment of his personal life should have made Marcus defensive, but instead he found himself admiring her directness. Alphas rarely find mates who can handle the responsibilities that come with the position. The constant danger, the pack politics, the fact that their partner's safety becomes a weapon that enemies can use against them. "So you decided it was easier to be alone." "I decided it was safer for everyone involved." Samantha moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the determination building in her hazel eyes. And now, Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him again, the careful control he'd maintained over his personal life threatening to crumble under the weight of her proximity. "Now I'm beginning to think that some risks might be worth taking." Before Samantha could respond, the front door opened with the kind of confidence that announced family rather than visitor. Rebecca appeared in the entryway, carrying medical supplies and wearing the expression of someone who had news that couldn't wait. "Marcus, we have a..." Rebecca stopped mid-sentence as she noticed Samantha, her eyes widening slightly before a knowing smile spread across her face. "Dr. Cross. I didn't expect to see you here so soon." "Rebecca, this is Dr. Samantha Cross," Marcus said, noting the way his sister's smile became increasingly amused. "Samantha, my sister Rebecca, the PAC's chief medical officer. And the person who told him he should trust you instead of trying to manage you," Rebecca added, extending her hand to Samantha with obvious warmth. "I'm glad to see he finally listened to advice for once." Marcus felt his jaw tighten at his sister's casual revelation. "Rebecca." "What?" "It's not like it wasn't obvious to everyone in the PAC meeting last night that you were. Did you come here for a reason?" Marcus interrupted, his tone carrying enough authority to remind Rebecca that they had company. Rebecca's expression sobered immediately. "Unfortunately, yes. We've got 3 PAC members down with some kind of illness that doesn't match anything in my medical database. High fevers, disorientation, and in 2 cases, inability to shift forms." Marcus felt his wolf go on high alert. Anything that affected the PAC's supernatural abilities was a threat that demanded immediate attention. "When did the symptoms start?" "First case was this morning, the other 2 within the past 3 hours. All 3 were on perimeter patrol duty within the last week." Rebecca paused, her medical training clearly working through possibilities. "Marcus, I think they were exposed to something." "Exposed to what?" "I don't know yet, but the symptoms suggest some kind of supernatural pathogen or toxin." something designed specifically to target werewolf physiology. Samantha stepped forward, her scientific mind obviously engaging with the problem. Dr. Kane, have you considered the possibility that this isn't naturally occurring? Someone with knowledge of werewolf biology could theoretically engineer something to target supernatural immune systems. Both Marcus and Rebecca stared at her, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. You're suggesting biological warfare, Rebecca said slowly. Someone deliberately attacking the pack. I'm suggesting that the timing is suspicious, Samantha replied. 3 months of routine research activity, then suddenly pack members start falling ill just days after my investigation attracts outside attention? That's not a coincidence. Marcus felt his alpha instincts surge with protective fury. If someone is targeting my pack, then we need to figure out who and how before more people get sick, Samantha finished. Dr. Kane, Rebecca, I might be able to help. My background is in wildlife biology, but I've done extensive work with disease vectors and environmental toxins. If you'll let me examine your patients, I might be able to identify the pathogen. Rebecca looked to Marcus, clearly seeking guidance from her alpha. Marcus found himself torn between the ingrained caution that had kept his pack safe for 8 years and the growing conviction that Samantha Cross might be exactly what they needed to survive whatever was coming. The pack medical facility isn't designed for human visitors, he said carefully. And if this is some kind of targeted attack, bringing you deeper into pack territory could put you at risk. Marcus, Samantha said, her voice carrying the same determined note that had characterized every conversation they'd had, I made a choice this morning to help protect your pack. That doesn't mean standing on the sidelines while people get sick. It means using every resource I have to figure out what's happening and how to stop it. The conviction in her voice stirred something deep in Marcus's chest, a recognition that went beyond attraction or professional respect. She wasn't just offering to help. She was claiming responsibility for pack welfare with the kind of fierce protectiveness that is wolf recognized as mate behavior. Rebecca, he said finally, prepare Dr. Cross with everything she needs to examine the patients safely. Full hazmat protocols until we know what we're dealing with. And if this really is some kind of biological attack? Rebecca asked. Marcus felt his expression shift into the cold mask that his enemies learned to fear. Then whoever is responsible is about to discover why challenging an alpha's pack is considered a fatal mistake. As Rebecca and Samantha began discussing medical protocols and examination procedures, Marcus moved to the windows that overlooked his territory. Somewhere out there, someone was targeting his people, the families and children he'd sworn to protect with his life. The careful balance he'd maintained between the human and supernatural worlds was crumbling, and the woman who had started as a threat was now the only person he trusted to help him save everything that mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Federal vehicles spotted on the access road. At least 6 agents, possibly more. ETA to Pack House. 20 minutes. Marcus stared at the message, his wolf stirring with a kind of predatory focus that meant someone was about to learn exactly why he'd held this territory unchallenged for 8 years. Ladies, he said, his voice carrying the authority that made both women turn immediately. We have company coming. Rebecca, get those patients stabilized and moved to the secure medical facility. Samantha. He paused, looking at the woman who had become his partner in less than 24 hours, knowing that what he was about to ask could put her in more danger than any rogue wolf or mysterious illness. Samantha, how do you feel about meeting some of those federal agents who've been asking questions about your research? Her response was immediate and fierce. I feel like it's time to find out who's trying to hurt your pack. Marcus Kane had spent 8 years protecting his people through careful planning, strategic thinking, and the kind of controlled aggression that deterred threats before they could escalate. But as he looked at Samantha Cross, brilliant, fearless, and completely committed to pack protection, he realized that perhaps the most dangerous strategy was letting someone else share the burden of leadership. The federal agents were about to discover that the Cascade Pack now had 2 apex predators guarding its secrets, and one of them had nothing left to lose. Chapter 8. The black SUVs rolled up the mountain road like a funeral procession, their tinted windows and government plates announcing federal authority with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Marcus watched from his office window as 6 vehicles arranged themselves in a circular driveway with military precision, disgorging agents in dark suits who moved with the coordinated efficiency of people accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in any room. 12 agents, Samantha observed from beside him, her voice carrying the calm analysis he was beginning to recognize as her response to high-stress situations. Probably FBI or some specialized task force, given the level of coordination. The lead agent is a woman, mid-40s, expensive suit, and she's carrying herself like someone who's used to being the smartest person in the room. Marcus glanced at her, impressed despite himself. You got all that from watching them get out of cars? Body language tells you everything you need to know about people, Samantha replied. The same way you can read pack dynamics in wolves, I can read authority structures in humans. And these people? They're here to establish dominance, not conduct a friendly inquiry. The intercom buzzed with Thomas's voice. Alpha, Agent Victoria Hendricks from the Department of Supernatural Affairs is requesting an immediate meeting. She says it's regarding irregularities in local wildlife documentation that require federal oversight. Marcus felt his wolf go very still. The Department of Supernatural Affairs was the shadow organization that most werewolves hoped never to encounter. Federal agents with extensive knowledge of the paranormal world and the authority to make entire supernatural communities disappear if they were deemed a threat to national security. DSA, he said quietly, and saw Samantha's expression sharpen with understanding. The people you mentioned who monitor supernatural activity, she said. They're here because of my research. They're here because someone wants them here. The DSA doesn't mobilize 12 agents for routine wildlife documentation. Marcus moved away from the window, his mind already shifting into the strategic thinking that had kept his pack safe for 8 years. This is coordinated, Samantha. Someone fed them information designed to make us look like a threat that requires federal intervention. The same someone who's been targeting your pack members with biological weapons? That would be my guess, yes. Samantha was quiet for a moment, her scientific mind clearly working through possibilities. Marcus, what happens if the DSA decides your pack is too dangerous to exist? Marcus met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, the cold, predatory focus of an alpha who had been pushed past the point of negotiation. They try to make us disappear, he said simply. And we remind them why apex predators have survived for thousands of years. Before Samantha could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway with the kind of controlled tension that meant the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Alpha, Agent Hendricks is demanding immediate access to all pack members and territories. She's also asking specifically for Dr. Cross. Of course she is. Marcus felt his control slip just enough to let his supernatural nature bleed through, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Send her up. But Thomas? Make sure Elena and her security team are in position. If this goes sideways, I want every pack member protected. As Thomas left to escort the federal agents upstairs, Marcus turned to Samantha with an expression that was part apology, part warning. Samantha, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, Agent Hendricks is not your ally. She's here to collect information that can be used to justify whatever action the DSA has already decided to take. Anything you say can and will be used against every member of my pack. Samantha moved closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, could see the determination burning in her hazel eyes. Then we make sure she doesn't get what she came for. The office door opened to reveal Agent Victoria Hendricks, and Marcus immediately understood Samantha's assessment. The woman who entered moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in the room, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her pale eyes, missing nothing as they catalogued every detail of Marcus's private space. Mr. Kane, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. I'm Agent Hendricks, Department of Supernatural Affairs. I believe you know why I'm here. I know that you've brought 12 federal agents onto private property without a warrant, Marcus replied, not rising from behind his desk. Beyond that, I'm afraid you'll have to enlighten me. Agent Hendricks smiled, and the expression held no warmth at all. Dr. Cross, I presume? Your research has been quite illuminating. Wildlife behavior patterns that suggest organized intelligence, territorial markings in locations that require human-level coordination, and yesterday's encounter with what witnesses described as an unusually large and aggressive wolf. Witnesses? Samantha asked, though Marcus could see her scientific mind already working out the implications. Your research partner, Jake Morrison, has been very forthcoming about his experiences in the Cascade Mountains. Social media posts, detailed interviews with federal agents, even photographic evidence of supernatural activity. Agent Hendricks moved deeper into the office, her gaze fixed on Marcus. But I think the most interesting part of Mr. Morrison's testimony concerns your relationship with Mr. Kane here, Dr. Cross. Marcus felt his wolf stir with protective fury. What exactly are you implying, Agent Hendricks? I'm implying that a wildlife researcher who has been documenting supernatural activity for 3 months suddenly finds herself under the protection of a businessman who can command the obedience of 200-pound wolves. I'm implying that Dr. Cross has been compromised by her proximity to the very subjects she's been studying. Samantha stepped forward, and Marcus recognized the body language that preceded her most devastating scientific arguments. Agent Hendricks, are you suggesting that my academic integrity has been compromised by personal relationships? Because I'd be very interested to see the evidence supporting that conclusion. The evidence, Dr. Cross, is standing right beside you. Marcus Kane, age 34, no birth certificate on file with any state or federal agency, owner of multiple businesses that generate impossible profit margins, and somehow capable of inspiring immediate submission from apex predators. Agent Hendricks pulled out a tablet, swiping through what appeared to be surveillance photos. Would you like to explain how a normal human being accomplishes that? The room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's heart beating with the steady rhythm of a predator preparing for violence. He could feel Samantha's tension beside him, could sense her brilliant mind working through the implications of federal surveillance and the trap that was closing around them. Agent Hendricks, Marcus said finally, his voice carrying the kind of dangerous quiet that made experienced agents reach for their weapons. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Have there?
Yes.
You seem to be under the impression that you can walk into my territory, threaten my people, and demand explanations for things that are frankly none of your business. Marcus rose from his chair, and Agent Hendricks actually took a step backward as she registered the sheer physical presence of 6 feet 4 inches of controlled supernatural power. You seem to think that federal authority means something in a place where I make the rules. Mr. Kane, I should warn you that threatening federal agents is exactly what I'm doing, Marcus finished, moving around the desk with predatory grace. But not in the way you think. You see, Agent Hendricks, the Department of Supernatural Affairs operates under the assumption that supernatural communities are isolated, disorganized, and vulnerable to federal pressure. You assume that we're hiding because we're weak. Marcus stopped directly in front of the federal agent, close enough that she had to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. But what if you're wrong? What if some supernatural communities have been hiding not out of weakness, but out of courtesy? What if some alphas have been maintaining the peace not because they fear federal oversight, but because they prefer to handle their own problems? Agent Hendricks reached for her phone, but Samantha's voice stopped her cold. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Excuse me? Samantha moved to stand beside Marcus, and he felt something fundamental shift in the air between them, a recognition that they were no longer two people facing a threat, but a unified force that was greater than the sum of its parts. Agent Hendricks, you came here looking for evidence of supernatural activity that poses a threat to national security, Samantha said, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used when delivering devastating research conclusions. But what you've found is a community that has been peacefully coexisting with the human world for generations. A community that contributes to the local economy, protects federal wilderness areas, and asks for nothing more than to be left alone. Dr. Cross, your research clearly documents. My research documents a healthy, stable ecosystem where supernatural elements exist in balance with natural wildlife. There are no indications of aggressive behavior toward humans, No evidence of territorial expansion beyond established boundaries, and no signs of the kind of supernatural terrorism that would justify federal intervention. Marcus watched in fascination as Samantha systematically dismantled the federal case with the same precision she brought to scientific analysis. But it was Agent Hendrix's response that told him everything he needed to know about who was really behind this investigation. Dr. Cross, your conclusions are irrelevant. We have evidence of biological weapons being deployed against supernatural targets, federal witnesses documenting aggressive supernatural behavior, and clear indications that this community poses an imminent threat to national security. The admission hung in the air like a smoking gun, and Marcus saw understanding dawn in Samantha's eyes. Agent Hendrix hadn't just confirmed the existence of the biological attacks, she'd revealed that the DSA had prior knowledge of them. Agent Hendrix, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that made his enemies reconsider their life choices. Are you telling me that federal agents have been conducting biological warfare against American citizens on American soil? I'm telling you that the Department of Supernatural Affairs has the authority to neutralize threats to national security by any means necessary, Agent Hendrix replied, but something in her tone suggested she was beginning to realize she'd said too much. Marcus felt his wolf surge with protective fury, and this time he didn't bother to contain it. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, supernatural authority that made Agent Hendrix's instincts scream warnings about apex predators and evolutionary hierarchies she didn't consciously understand. Agent Hendrix, he said, his voice resonating with a kind of dominance that made every supernatural creature within 50 miles recognize their alpha. You have exactly 60 seconds to remove yourself and your team from my territory before I decide that the courtesy I've been showing the federal government has reached its limit. Mr. Kane, you can't threaten federal agents. 55 seconds. Agent Hendrix looked between Marcus and Samantha, clearly recognizing that the situation had moved far beyond her ability to control. But it was Samantha who delivered the final blow. Agent Hendrix, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Inspector General's office regarding DSA involvement in biological weapons testing on American soil. I'll also be submitting my research to every major scientific journal, documenting the peaceful coexistence between supernatural communities and human populations. Samantha's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sure my colleagues will be very interested to learn how federal agencies have been manufacturing threats to justify their own existence. Marcus watched Agent Hendrix realize that her carefully planned investigation had just turned into a potential career-ending disaster. The DSA depended on secrecy and the assumption that supernatural communities had no legal recourse. They had not anticipated facing a respected scientist with the credentials and connections to expose their operations to public scrutiny. This isn't over, Agent Hendrix said, but the words carried no real threat, just the bitter acknowledgement of someone who had underestimated her opponents. No, Marcus agreed, moving to stand beside Samantha in a display of unified strength. It isn't. But the next time you want to discuss supernatural affairs in my territory, Agent Hendrix, I suggest you make an appointment like everyone else. After the federal agents retreated to their black SUVs, Marcus and Samantha stood together at the office window, watching the government convoy disappear down the mountain road. Well, Samantha said finally, that could have gone worse. Marcus turned to look at her, this brilliant, fearless woman who had just faced down a dozen federal agents and emerged victorious through sheer force of scientific integrity and protective fury. Samantha, he said, his voice rough with emotions he was still learning to express, thank you. For what? For standing with me. For protecting my pack. For being exactly what I needed when I needed it most. Samantha moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, could feel the warmth that radiated from her skin. Marcus, I told you this morning that I was choosing to help protect your pack. I meant it. We're in this together now. Marcus felt something fundamental settle into place in his chest, a recognition that went beyond attraction or professional partnership. Looking at Samantha Cross, he saw not just a brilliant scientist or a fearless ally, but a woman strong enough to be his equal, brave enough to share his burdens and fierce enough to stand beside him against any threat. His wolf stirred with approval and something that felt suspiciously like contentment. Dr. Samantha Cross had started as a threat to everything he'd built. Now she was becoming the foundation for everything he hoped to protect. Chapter 9. The secure medical facility buried beneath Kane Industries looked more like something from a science fiction movie than a rural mountain clinic. Samantha followed Rebecca through corridors lined with equipment that she was beginning to realize represented decades of supernatural medical research, her scientists' mind cataloging innovations that the human medical community wouldn't see for years. "The isolation chambers are through here," Rebecca said, leading her toward a section of the facility that hummed with advanced air filtration systems. "I've got the 3 infected pack members in complete quarantine until we can identify the pathogen." Samantha paused at the observation window of the first chamber, her heart clenching at the sight of a young man who couldn't be more than 25, his face flushed with fever as he thrashed restlessly on the medical bed. Even through the glass, she could see the supernatural strength that marked him as Werewolf, but there was something fundamentally wrong with the way his body moved, like his wolf nature was at war with his human form. "How long since onset?" she asked, pulling on the hazmat suit that Rebecca had provided. "David was the first case, about 18 hours now. His temperature has been holding steady at 104, but what's really concerning is the neurological symptoms. He keeps trying to shift forms, but something is preventing the transformation from completing." Samantha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature-controlled facility. "Rebecca, that's not just dangerous. For werewolves, that could be fatal. The shift between forms is hardwired into your neurological systems. If something is blocking that process, it could cause permanent brain damage, yes. Or worse." Rebecca's medical training was clearly warring with her emotional response to seeing pack members suffer. "Marcus has been here every hour, checking on them. He's taking this personally." "Of course he is. They're his people." Samantha moved to the next observation window, studying the patient charts that Rebecca had prepared. "But Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "What? Could this pathogen affect Marcus? Is there any chance that whatever is targeting your pack members could also target an alpha?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her expression shifting into the kind of clinical detachment that medical professionals used when delivering devastating diagnoses. "Samantha, alphas aren't immune to biological weapons. We're stronger, more resilient, but if someone has engineered a pathogen specifically to target werewolf physiology, then Marcus is just as vulnerable as anyone else in the pack. More vulnerable, actually. Alpha physiology is different, more complex, more integrated with supernatural abilities. If this pathogen is designed to disrupt the connection between human and wolf nature, an alpha would experience the most severe symptoms." Samantha felt her chest tighten with a fear that was becoming increasingly familiar, the terror of losing someone who had become essential to her existence in less than 48 hours. "Does he know?" "Marcus knows the risks. He also knows that his pack needs him to stay strong, so he's been ignoring the logical medical precautions in favor of being present for his people." Rebecca met Samantha's eyes through the reflection in the observation glass. "Which is where you come in." "I'm not sure I follow." "Samantha, my brother has been alone for 8 years, carrying the weight of pack leadership without anyone to share the burden. He's never learned to delegate responsibility because he's never had anyone he could trust completely." Rebecca paused, her voice softening. "Until now." Samantha turned to face Rebecca directly, seeing something in the other woman's expression that made her wolf-born instincts sit up and take notice, even though she didn't have any wolf-born instincts to speak of. "You want me to convince him to take precautions," Samantha said. "I want you to be his partner in the way that no one else has ever been allowed to be. I want you to share the decisions, the worry, the responsibility of protecting 63 lives." Rebecca's smile was sad and hopeful at the same time. "I want you to be what he's needed for 8 years, but never allowed himself to have." Before Samantha could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the medical facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and the intercom crackled with Thomas's urgent voice. "Code red. All personnel to emergency stations." We have hostiles on the perimeter. Rebecca was moving immediately, her medical training shifting into emergency mode. The main facility has lockdown protocols. Stay here, monitor the patients, and whatever you do, don't leave this level until someone comes for you. Rebecca, wait. But the PAC's chief medical officer was already disappearing down the corridor, leaving Samantha alone in a high-tech medical facility with 3 critically ill werewolves and the growing certainty that whatever was happening above ground was connected to the biological attacks on PAC members. She moved back to the observation windows, studying the patients with new urgency. If someone was targeting the PAC systematically, first with biological weapons, then with direct assault, then every minute mattered for both treatment and defense. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dr. Cross, if you want to save the PAC members, meet me at the old logging station in 20 minutes. Come alone, and bring any samples you've collected from the infected werewolves. This is your only chance to get the antidote. Samantha stared at the message, her scientific mind immediately recognizing it as either a trap or the break they desperately needed. But as she looked at David's fevered face through the observation glass, she realized that the distinction might not matter. If there was even a chance of saving the infected PAC members, she had to take it. She photographed the patient charts, gathered blood samples that Rebecca had already collected, and headed for the facility's emergency exit. The alarms were still blaring above ground, which meant that whatever Marcus was dealing with would keep him occupied long enough for her to investigate this potential lead. The old logging station sat in a cleared area about 2 miles from the main PAC territory, its abandoned buildings providing the kind of isolated meeting spot that suggested either legitimate medical necessity or elaborate ambush. Samantha approached with a caution that 3 months of tracking apex predators had taught her, every sense alert for signs of danger. The figure waiting for her beside the rusted logging equipment was not what she had expected. Dr. Elena Vasquez, whom she remembered as the PAC's head of security, stood in the clearing with her hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression, but something about her posture suggested barely contained desperation. Dr. Cross, thank God you came, Elena said, moving toward her with obvious relief. I wasn't sure you'd get the message in time. Samantha stopped several feet away, her scientific training warring with intuition that screamed warnings. Elena? What are you doing here? Marcus said you were coordinating perimeter security. I am. Or I was, until I discovered who's really behind the attacks on our PAC. Elena's expression was grim with a kind of knowledge that carried a terrible price. Samantha, the biological pathogen isn't coming from outside enemies. It's coming from inside the PAC. The words hit Samantha like a physical blow. What are you talking about? There's a faction within the Cascade PAC that believes Marcus has become too accommodating to human interests. They think his leadership has made us vulnerable, and they want him removed before he compromises our safety further. Elena pulled out a vial of clear liquid, holding it like a lifeline. The pathogen was designed to target PAC members loyal to Marcus, weakening his support base and forcing a leadership challenge. Samantha felt the pieces of a much larger conspiracy falling into place. The federal investigation, the biological attacks, the timing of everything, all coordinated by PAC members who want to see Marcus replaced with an alpha who believes in complete separation from the human world. Elena stepped closer, her voice urgent with desperation. Samantha, they know about your relationship with Marcus. They know that you've become important to him, and they're planning to use that against him. Use it how? Elena's expression became haunted with the kind of knowledge that no one should have to carry. They're going to force Marcus into a position where he has to choose between saving you and saving the PAC. And when he chooses you, because he will choose you, they'll use that as evidence that he's no longer fit to lead. Samantha stared at the vial in Elena's hands, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. The antidote. If you can cure the infected PAC members, then Marcus keeps his support base, the leadership challenge fails, and the conspirators are exposed before they can do more damage. Elena held out the vial. But Samantha, administering this antidote is going to require someone Marcus trusts completely. Someone who can get close to the patients without raising suspicion from the conspirators who are still in the medical facility. Samantha reached for the vial, but Elena's next words made her freeze. "There's something else you need to know. The reason the conspirators chose biological warfare wasn't just tactical, it was personal. Marcus's father was killed by a pathogen designed specifically to target alpha physiology. The same people who are behind these current attacks were responsible for his death 8 years ago." The revelation hit Samantha with devastating clarity. Marcus hadn't just inherited his position as alpha, he'd claimed it in the aftermath of his father's assassination, probably as a young man barely prepared for the weight of leadership. Every careful control he maintained, every strategic decision he made, every moment of isolation he endured was built on the foundation of losing his father to enemies who operated from within his own pack. "Elena," Samantha said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest, "how do I know I can trust you?" Elena smiled, and for the first time since the conversation began, the expression carried genuine warmth. "Because, Dr. Cross, I'm betting my life that you love him enough to save him. And if I'm wrong about that, then we're all dead anyway." Samantha took the vial, feeling its weight like a promise and a threat. "What do you need me to do?" 20 minutes later, Samantha was back in the medical facility, administering the antidote to David while monitoring his vital signs for any indication that Elena's desperate gambit was working. The young werewolf's temperature had already begun dropping, and the restless movement that suggested supernatural distress was calming into normal sleep. But as she moved to the second patient, Samantha became aware that she was no longer alone in the facility. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, moving with the kind of purpose that suggested immediate danger. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Where are you? Medical facility is compromised. Get out now." Samantha looked at the remaining patients, at the antidote that could save their lives, and at the corridor that probably contained enemies who would kill her to prevent Marcus from keeping his pack loyalty. Dr. Samantha Cross had spent her career studying apex predators, but she'd never been in a position where she had to become one. That was about to change. Chapter 10. The medical facility's emergency lighting cast eerie shadows down the corridors as Samantha pressed herself against the wall outside the isolation chambers, listening to the approaching footsteps that meant her 20 minutes of relative safety were over. In her hands, she clutched the remaining doses of antidote and her phone displaying Marcus's increasingly urgent messages. "Get out now." Internal threat confirmed. "Don't trust anyone except Rebecca." Samantha, respond. Facility lockdown initiated. If you're reading this, stay hidden. Coming for you. The footsteps stopped directly outside the isolation ward, and Samantha heard voices that made her blood turn to ice. "She's definitely here," said a voice she recognized as Dr. Martin Webb, the PAC's assistant medical officer. "Fresh access logs show she's been treating the patients." "Then she has the antidote," replied another voice, Thomas Reeves, Marcus's own beta and trusted second-in-command. Elena must have made contact. Samantha felt the world shift beneath her feet as she processed the implications. Thomas, Marcus's most trusted advisor, the man who had served as his beta for 6 years, was part of the conspiracy against him. "The question is whether she's already administered it," Webb continued. "If those patients recover, our timeline accelerates. Marcus will know the pathogen was engineered, and he'll start looking for internal threats." "Then we end this tonight," Thomas said, his voice carrying an authority that made Samantha realize she'd been underestimating him for days. "The challenge will be issued at the full pack gathering. Marcus will have to accept or forfeit his position. And if he accepts..." Thomas's laugh was cold and calculating. "Then Garrett kills him in fair combat, and I become alpha of a pack that understands the necessity of keeping human interference out of our territory. Starting with Dr. Samantha Cross." Samantha's hands trembled as she realized the scope of the trap closing around them. This wasn't just about pack politics or leadership disputes. This was a carefully orchestrated coup designed to eliminate both Marcus and anyone who represented connection to the human world. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number. "Third floor utility closet. Now. R. Rebecca." Marcus's sister was still somewhere in the facility, and she was offering rescue. But getting to the third floor meant passing through corridors that were now being patrolled by conspirators who wanted her dead. Samantha looked at the isolation chambers where 2 pack members still needed the antidote, then at her phone displaying Marcus's messages. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to get to safety, and let others handle the medical crisis. But as she watched the young werewolf in the second chamber struggling with fever-induced convulsions, she realized that running wasn't an option. These people were Marcus's responsibility, which meant they were hers now too. Dr. Samantha Cross had never considered herself particularly brave, but she was about to discover that love could make anyone willing to face impossible odds. She slipped into the second isolation chamber, moving with the silent efficiency that months of tracking apex predators had taught her. The patient, a woman in her 30s with a kind of supernatural strength that marked her as a powerful pack member, was burning with fever and thrashing in restraints designed to prevent her from hurting herself during failed shift attempts. "Easy," Samantha whispered, administering the antidote with steady hands despite the voices growing closer in the corridor. "This is going to help, I promise." The woman's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Samantha with a kind of desperate hope that made her chest tighten with protective fury. "Dr. Cross? What's happening? You were poisoned, but you're going to be fine. I need you to stay quiet and pretend to still be unconscious, okay? There are people in the facility who don't want you to recover." Understanding dawned in the woman's eyes. The kind of pack loyalty that Marcus inspired made her immediately comprehensible to the danger they were all facing. She nodded once and closed her eyes, her breathing shifting into the pattern of unconsciousness even as her supernatural hearing tracked the threats moving through the facility. Samantha moved to the third chamber, but the sound of footsteps directly outside made her freeze. Through the observation window, she could see Thomas and Webb entering the isolation ward, their expressions carrying the cold determination of people who had already decided that ends justified means. "Dr. Cross," Thomas called, his voice echoing through the facility with false friendliness. "We know you're here. Elena told us about the antidote, and we'd like to discuss the situation with you." Samantha pressed herself against the wall beside the third chamber door, her heart pounding as she realized that Elena's desperate gambit might have been exactly what the conspirators wanted. Had the pack's head of security genuinely been trying to help, or had she been herding Samantha into a trap? "Doctor," Webb added, "we're not your enemies. We're trying to protect the pack from an alpha who has lost sight of his responsibilities. Surely you can understand our position." Samantha looked at the third patient, a teenager who couldn't be more than 17, his face flushed with fever and his body fighting the biological weapon that was designed to destroy his supernatural nature. The antidote in her hands was his only chance of survival. She made her choice. Moving with the swift efficiency of someone who had nothing left to lose, Samantha entered the third chamber and administered the final dose of antidote. The teenager's eyes opened immediately, and she saw in them the same pack loyalty and understanding that had characterized the previous patient. "Stay unconscious," she whispered. "Help is coming." "Dr. Cross." Thomas's voice was closer now, carrying a note of impatience that suggested his friendly facade was wearing thin. "Your concern for the patients is admirable, but misguided. These pack members are suffering because Marcus Kane has compromised our security with his human sympathies. Prolonging their illness serves a greater good." Samantha felt fury surge through her chest, the kind of protective rage that made human mothers lift cars off trapped children and enabled normal people to perform impossible feats when those they loved were threatened. "Thomas," she called, stepping out of the isolation chamber to face him directly. "If you want to discuss Marcus's leadership, then call him down here and have that conversation like adults. Poisoning innocent people to make a political point is cowardly and beneath any leader worth following." Thomas and Webb stepped into view, and Samantha saw in their expressions a moment when pretense fell away completely. These weren't pack members struggling with difficult decisions. They were predators who had already decided that she represented a threat that required elimination. "Dr. Cross," Thomas said, his voice dropping into the register that made every supernatural creature recognize an alpha challenge. "You have become a liability to this pack. Your influence over Marcus has made him weak, and weak alphas get their people killed." Marcus isn't weak, Samantha replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice.
He's evolved.
He's learned that true strength comes from building bridges rather than burning them, from inspiring loyalty rather than demanding submission through fear. Pretty words from someone who has never had to make the hard choices that leadership requires. Thomas moved closer, and Samantha could feel the supernatural power radiating from him, not alpha-level authority, but strong enough to be dangerous to a human who had no supernatural defenses of her own. You're right, Samantha said. I've never had to make the hard choices. But I've spent 3 months watching Marcus make them, and I've seen the results. A pack that thrives, businesses that prosper, and a territory that's been peaceful for 8 years. That's not weakness, Thomas. That's the kind of strength that builds legacies. Webb stepped forward, and something in his medical bag suggested that the conversation was about to take a much more dangerous turn. Dr. Cross, we're offering you one chance to walk away from this situation. Leave the territory, discontinue your research, and never contact Marcus Kane again. In exchange, we'll ensure your safety and provide resources for you to continue your academic career elsewhere. And if I refuse? Thomas's smile was cold and final. Then you become another casualty of the leadership transition that this pack desperately needs. Samantha looked at these 2 men who were prepared to kill her to advance their political agenda, and she realized that somewhere in the past 48 hours, she had stopped being Dr. Samantha Cross, respected wildlife biologist. She had become something far more dangerous, a woman who had found her pack and would die before she let anyone hurt the people she loved. Gentlemen, she said, pulling out her phone with movements that were deliberately calm and controlled, I think you should know that this entire conversation has been broadcast live to Marcus, Rebecca, and Elena through an open call that I initiated when I heard you approaching. The expressions on Thomas and Webb's faces shifted from confidence to horror as they realized that their conspiracy had just been exposed to the very people they were trying to overthrow. You're bluffing, Thomas said, but something in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Samantha held up her phone, showing the active call that had been running for the past 5 minutes. Marcus?
Did you get all that?
Marcus's voice came through the speaker with a kind of deadly calm that made apex predators reconsider their life choices. I got it, Samantha. Thomas, Webb, I want both of you in the main conference room in 5 minutes. We're going to have a discussion about loyalty, conspiracy, and exactly what happens to pack members who threaten the people I love. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of running footsteps echoing through the facility, not the cautious approach of conspirators, but the determined stride of an alpha coming to protect his mate. Marcus Kane was done negotiating, and everyone in the medical facility was about to remember why he'd held his territory unchallenged for 8 years. Chapter 11. The main conference room had never felt more like a battlefield than it did at midnight, with 63 pack members arranged in a circle that left the center open for what everyone knew was coming. Marcus stood at the head of the room, every inch of him radiating the kind of controlled fury that made even his most loyal supporters take an involuntary step back. Samantha had never seen him like this, not just angry but unleashed. The careful human facade that he maintained in their private interactions was gone, replaced by something primal and deadly that reminded everyone in the room exactly what they were dealing with. 8 years, Marcus said, his voice carrying the resonance that made every supernatural creature present feel the weight of alpha authority in their bones. 8 years, I have led this pack. 8 years of prosperity, growth, and peace. 8 years without a single pack member lost to outside threats or internal strife. He moved around the circle, his gaze touching each face with the kind of intensity that made grown werewolves drop their eyes in submission. And in those 8 years, how many of you have questioned my leadership? How many have come to me with concerns about my decisions, my methods, my judgment? The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of nervous breathing and racing heartbeats. None of you, Marcus continued, stopping directly in front of Thomas, who stood with Garrett Blackwood, the challenger who had emerged from the pack's more traditional faction. None of you had the courage to voice your concerns directly, so instead you chose conspiracy. Poison. Biological warfare against your own pack members. Thomas lifted his chin with defiance that was undermined by the sweat beading on his forehead. Marcus, your leadership has made us vulnerable. Your accommodation with human interests. My accommodation with human interests has generated over $50 million in revenue for this pack in the past 3 years alone, Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through Thomas's justification like a blade. My human connections have provided cover for our supernatural activities, legal protection for our territories, and resources that have allowed every member of this pack to prosper. At what cost? Garrett spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the rough authority of someone accustomed to leading through strength rather than strategy. We've become dependent on human systems, Marcus.
Weak.
Compromised. Your father would never have. My father is dead, Marcus said quietly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Killed by pack members who believed that isolation and aggression were preferable to adaptation and growth. Just like the pack members standing in front of me now. Samantha watched the confrontation unfold with the kind of fascination that came from witnessing something that would reshape the fundamental power structure of the supernatural world. But underneath her scientific curiosity, she felt something else entirely, protective fury at seeing the man she loved forced to defend his life's work against people who should have been his allies. Garrett Blackwood, Marcus said, his voice carrying the formality that marked an official pack challenge, you stand accused of conspiracy against the Alpha, biological warfare against pack members, and treason against the Cascade Pack. Do you deny these charges? Garrett's response was to begin the shift from human to wolf form, his body expanding and changing with the fluid grace that marked him as a powerful supernatural predator. I challenge your right to leadership, Marcus Kane. By combat, as is the ancient way. The pack members arranged around the circle stirred restlessly as supernatural law asserted itself. Alpha challenges were sacred traditions that couldn't be refused without forfeiting the position entirely, and everyone present understood that the next few minutes would determine the future of everything they'd built together. Accepted, Marcus said simply, and began his own shift into the massive black wolf that had dominated this territory for 8 years. Samantha watched in fascination and terror as the two wolves circled each other in the center of the room, each looking for weakness or opportunity. Garrett was slightly larger, with the kind of scarred hide that spoke of a lifetime spent settling disputes through violence. But Marcus moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that truly mattered. The battle, when it began, was over almost before Samantha could process what she was seeing. Garrett lunged with the desperate fury of someone who knew this was his only chance at power, but Marcus was already moving, using his challenger's momentum against him in a display of combat expertise that reminded everyone why he'd held this position unchallenged. Within 30 seconds, Garrett lay on his back in the center of the circle, Marcus's jaws around his throat in the position that meant immediate death if he chose to apply pressure. Yield, Marcus growled, his wolf voice carrying the authority that needed no translation. I yield, Garrett gasped, and the formal words echoed through the conference room with the weight of pack law. Marcus released him and shifted back to human form, his movements controlled despite the adrenaline that must have been coursing through his system. But when he turned to face Thomas, Samantha saw something in his expression that made her take an involuntary step forward. Thomas Reeves, Marcus said, 6 years you served as my beta. 6 years of trust, confidence, and shared responsibility. When I offered you that position, I believed I was choosing someone who understood the weight of protecting 63 lives. Thomas straightened, clearly recognizing that his fate was about to be decided. Marcus, you poisoned 3 of our people to advance a political agenda, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the kind of disappointment that was somehow more devastating than anger. You conspired with outside agencies to bring federal attention down on our pack. And tonight, you ordered the death of the woman I love because she represented a threat to your ambitions. The formal accusation hung in the air like a sword, and Samantha felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She had become more than Marcus's human partner. She was now officially recognized as his chosen mate, with all the protection and responsibility that position entailed. By pack law, Marcus said, The penalty for conspiracy against the Alpha is exile or death. The penalty for treason against pack members is death. The penalty for threatening the Alphas mate is death. Thomas's face went pale as he realized that his careful political maneuvering had just collapsed into a capital crime. Marcus, please. However, Marcus continued, the woman you threatened to kill has asked me to show you mercy. Samantha felt her breath catch as every head in the room turned toward her. She hadn't realized that her whispered conversation with Marcus before the challenge had been overheard, but apparently her plea for Thomas's life had carried more weight than she'd understood. Dr. Samantha Cross, Marcus said, his voice shifting into the formal tone reserved for pack business, has pointed out that exile may be a more fitting punishment than death. That removing you from pack protection and pack resources will allow you to face the consequences of your actions without staining this gathering with unnecessary bloodshed. Thomas looked between Marcus and Samantha, clearly struggling to understand how his certain execution had suddenly become a reprieve. You're sparing me? I'm exiling you, Marcus corrected. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and leave pack territory. You are forbidden from returning, from contacting any pack member, and from revealing pack secrets to outside parties. If you violate any of these conditions, the sentence of death will be carried out immediately. The mercy was real, but it was also brutal. Exile from the pack meant losing not just community and family, but the supernatural support network that made it possible for werewolves to exist safely in the human world. Thomas was being spared death, but condemned to a life of isolation that might prove worse than execution. As Thomas and Garrett were escorted from the conference room by Elena's security team, Marcus turned to address the remaining pack members. But instead of the triumphant speech that might have been expected after successfully defending his leadership, his words carried the weight of someone who understood that true victory required healing as well as conquest. We have survived a challenge to our unity, he said, his voice reaching every corner of the room. But survival isn't enough. We need to rebuild the trust that conspiracy has damaged, and we need to do it together. He moved to stand beside Samantha, his hand finding hers with the kind of natural ease that spoke of a connection that went beyond political alliance. Dr. Samantha Cross has proven herself to be more than my partner, Marcus continued. She has proven herself to be a guardian of this pack, willing to risk her own life to protect pack members she barely knows. She has earned her place among us not through supernatural strength, but through loyalty, courage, and the kind of fierce protectiveness that makes someone family. Samantha felt tears prick her eyes as she realized what Marcus was offering, not just acceptance into his personal life, but formal recognition as a pack member with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Do you accept? Marcus asked quietly, his wolf eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt or reservation. Samantha looked around the circle at 63 faces that were watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to acceptance to genuine warmth. These people had become her responsibility in ways that she was still learning to understand, but the weight of that commitment felt right in a way that surprised her. I accept, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the conference room. I accept the responsibility of pack membership, the duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and the privilege of standing beside an alpha whose strength comes from love rather than fear. The pack's response was immediate and visceral, a sound that was part howl, part cheer, and entirely supernatural in its expression of communal joy. As the noise washed over her, Samantha felt something fundamental shift in her chest, a recognition that she had found her place in a world she hadn't known existed a week ago. Marcus pulled her into his arms, and his kiss tasted like victory, relief, and the promise of a future that neither of them had dared imagine possible. When they finally broke apart, Marcus addressed his pack one final time. Tomorrow, we begin the work of rebuilding. Tonight, we celebrate the fact that we survived a challenge that could have destroyed everything we've built together. As the formal gathering dissolved into the kind of chaotic celebration that marked major pack victories, Samantha found herself surrounded by people who wanted to welcome her officially into their community. Rebecca peered at her elbow with champagne and the kind of sisterly grin that suggested she'd been planning this celebration for days. So, Rebecca said, How does it feel to be the pack's first human member? Samantha looked across the room at Marcus, who was accepting congratulations from pack members while keeping one eye on her with a kind of protective attention that she was learning to recognize as mate behavior. Like coming home, she said simply. And for the first time in her life, Dr. Samantha Cross, scientist, researcher, and now officially the mate of the most powerful alpha in the Pacific Northwest, felt like she knew exactly where she belonged. Chapter 12. 3 weeks later, Samantha woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what had become their bedroom and the sound of Marcus moving around the kitchen below. The pack house no longer felt like the lonely sanctuary of a solitary alpha. It had transformed into something warm and alive, filled with the kind of domestic contentment that she'd never imagined possible. She found him at the massive granite island, wearing nothing but jeans and reading through reports while he waited for coffee to brew. The sight of him, relaxed, unguarded, and completely hers, still made her heart skip in ways that defied scientific explanation. "Good morning, Dr. Kane," he said without looking up from his papers, and the way he said her new name made warmth spread through her chest. "Good morning, Mr. Kane," she replied, moving to wrap her arms around his waist from behind. "Though I should probably get used to Alpha Kane for formal pack business." Marcus leaned back into her embrace, and she could feel some of the tension leave his shoulders. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of rebuilding pack trust, restructuring security protocols, and dealing with the aftermath of the conspiracy. But they'd handled it together, and every challenge had only strengthened their partnership. "The medical reports came in this morning," Marcus said, turning in her arms to face her directly. "All 3 patients have made complete recoveries. No residual effects from the pathogen, and their supernatural abilities are fully restored." "Thank God," Samantha breathed, remembering those terrifying hours when she'd thought they might lose pack members to biological warfare. "And the investigation into the other conspirators?" "Elena's security team has cleared the remaining suspects. Thomas and Garrett were working with only a handful of supporters, and most of them have chosen to accept the new leadership structure rather than face exile." Marcus brushed a strand of hair away from her face with a kind of gentle touch that never failed to make her feel precious. "We're stronger now than we were before the challenge. Because now everyone knows exactly where they stand," Samantha said, understanding the pack dynamics that had taken her weeks to learn. "And they've seen that you can be both powerful and merciful when the situation calls for it." "We can be both powerful and merciful," Marcus corrected, his hands settling on her hips with possessive certainty. "This pack has 2 leaders now, Samantha. You've earned that authority through your actions, not just through our bond." The reminder of her new position still felt surreal. Dr. Samantha Cross, who had spent her career observing apex predators from a safe distance, was now the second most powerful person in a supernatural community of 63 werewolves. The responsibility was enormous, but it felt right in ways that her solitary academic life never had. "Speaking of our bond," Marcus said, his voice dropping into the register that made her pulse quicken, "there's something I want to discuss with you." "Oh." Marcus moved to the kitchen counter and returned with a small velvet box that made Samantha's breath catch in her throat. But when he opened it, the contents weren't what she'd expected. Instead of a traditional engagement ring, the box held something that looked like a piece of ancient craftsmanship, a band of white gold inlaid with symbols that seemed to shimmer with their own light. "Samantha," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of vulnerability that he only showed in their most private moments, "this is a mating bond ring. It's been in my family for 6 generations, passed down from alpha to alpha, waiting for the right person to claim it." Samantha stared at the ring, recognizing the significance of what he was offering. This wasn't just a marriage proposal, it was an invitation to share the deepest level of supernatural bonding that werewolves were capable of. "The symbols," she said, reaching out to trace the intricate patterns with one finger. "They're not just decorative, are they?" "They're a supernatural contract," Marcus confirmed. "A bond that goes beyond human marriage vows. If you accept this ring, Samantha, you're accepting a connection that will tie our lives together on levels that most people can't even imagine." "What kind of levels?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly trying to find words for something that existed beyond normal human experience. Emotional resonance. The ability to sense each other's feelings across distances. Shared strength in times of crisis. And eventual shared longevity. The last revelation hit Samantha like a physical blow. Longevity. The mating bond doesn't make humans immortal, but it does extend their lifespans to match their supernatural partners. If you accept this ring, Samantha, you're accepting a life measured in centuries rather than decades. Samantha looked at the ring, then at Marcus's face, seeing in his expression the weight of what he was asking. He wasn't just proposing marriage. He was offering her a fundamental transformation that would change the basic parameters of her existence. Marcus, she said slowly, are you asking me to give up being human? I'm asking you to become something more than human, he replied. To become my true partner in every sense of the word. My equal in power, my match in longevity, my bondmate in ways that go deeper than any human relationship can reach. Samantha felt tears prick her eyes as she realized the magnitude of his trust. Marcus Kane, Alpha of the Cascade Pack, was offering her not just his love, but his very essence, the supernatural connection that defined his existence. What if I can't handle it, she asked. What if the supernatural bond is too much for a human mind to process? Marcus smiled, and the expression was soft with the kind of love that made her feel like she could conquer anything. Samantha, you've already proven that you can handle anything the supernatural world throws at you. You've faced federal agents, conspiracy, biological warfare, and pack politics without losing your essential self. A mating bond isn't going to change who you are. It's going to amplify everything that makes you the woman I fell in love with. He took her hands in his, and she could feel the supernatural strength that he kept carefully controlled in her presence. But I need you to be certain. Once the bond is established, it can't be broken. You would be tied to me, to this pack, to this life forever. Samantha looked around the kitchen that had become their sanctuary, remembering the journey that had brought her from a lonely scientist studying wolves to a woman who had found her place as the mate of the most powerful alpha in the Pacific Northwest. Every choice she'd made over the past month had led to this moment, the opportunity to claim the life she'd never known she wanted. Marcus, she said, her voice steady with absolute certainty, I've spent my entire career studying apex predators from the outside, wondering what it would be like to be part of their world instead of just observing it. You're offering me the chance to stop being a spectator and start being a participant. She looked directly into his eyes, seeing there the wolf that had recognized her as his mate from their first encounter.
Yes.
I accept the bond, the responsibility, and the promise of forever. Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, and Samantha gasped as she felt something fundamental shift in her perception of the world. It was as if someone had suddenly turned up the contrast on reality. Colors were more vivid, sounds were clearer, and underneath it all, she could feel Marcus's presence like a warm golden thread connecting them at the deepest level of existence. Do you feel it? Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion. I feel everything, Samantha whispered, marveling at the way she could sense his wolf's contentment, his human joy, and the profound relief of someone who had finally found his perfect match. Marcus, it's incredible. He pulled her into his arms, and their kiss carried the weight of promises that would last for centuries. But underneath the passion and the supernatural connection, Samantha tasted something even more precious, the simple human love of two people who had found their home in each other. When they finally broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers with the kind of profound gratitude that needed no words. Welcome to forever, my love, he said. The annual Cascade Pack gathering had grown into something that resembled a small festival, with families spread across the meadow behind the pack house, children playing games that involved supernatural strength and speed, and the kind of communal celebration that marked a community in perfect harmony. Samantha stood on the back deck, watching the organized chaos with the satisfaction of someone who had found her place in the world. Her research had evolved from wildlife documentation to supernatural anthropology, and her published papers on pack dynamics and community structure had revolutionized the academic understanding of social predators. without revealing anything that could compromise pack security. Regrets? Marcus asked, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of wine and the kind of smile that still made her heart skip after 12 months of marriage. About what? Giving up the lonely academic life for this beautiful chaos. Samantha laughed, accepting the wine and leaning into his warmth. Marcus, I spent 30 years thinking I was content with solitude and scientific observation. It took falling in love with an alpha werewolf to realize that I'd been settling for half a life. Below them, Rebecca was organizing a 3-legged race that involved 12-year-old werewolves who could run faster than Olympic athletes, while Elena supervised a game that appeared to involve throwing pine cones with supernatural accuracy. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air with the kind of joy that came from people who knew they were exactly where they belonged. The federal inquiry was officially closed yesterday, Marcus said, pulling her closer against his side. Agent Hendricks has been transferred to a desk job in Montana, and the DSA has been instructed to focus their attention on actual threats rather than peaceful communities. Good. Though, I suspect our research publications had something to do with that outcome. Marcus's smile was sharp with pride. Having the mate of an alpha werewolf publish peer-reviewed papers on sustainable supernatural human coexistence tends to make federal agencies reconsider their approach to community relations. Samantha had discovered that her unique position as both pack member and respected scientist gave her a platform that no one in the supernatural world had possessed before. Her research was helping to build bridges between human and paranormal communities across the country, one carefully written academic paper at a time. Any word from Thomas? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. He's living in Alaska, working as a wilderness guide. Elena's contacts say he's adjusting to exile better than expected. Marcus's expression softened slightly. I think removing him from the pressure of pack politics allowed him to rediscover who he was before ambition consumed him. Samantha nodded, understanding the complicated mixture of justice and mercy that marked Marcus's leadership style. Thomas had betrayed them all, but he'd also served the pack faithfully for 6 years before his judgment had been compromised by fear and ambition. And Jake Morrison? Currently completing his graduate degree with a focus on wildlife photography that specifically avoids the Pacific Northwest. Apparently, his encounter with unusually large wolves convinced him that his talents were better suited to documenting less dangerous subjects. Probably for the best. A commotion in the meadow drew their attention as 2 teenage werewolves started what appeared to be a friendly wrestling match that was quickly attracting spectators and informal betting. The sight reminded Samantha of her first encounter with Marcus, the way he'd commanded instant respect and submission from creatures that should have been beyond human control. Do you miss it? Marcus asked, following her gaze. The thrill of discovering something completely outside your previous experience. Samantha considered the question seriously, remembering the excitement of those first weeks when every day had brought revelations that challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. I thought I would, she said finally. But it turns out that living inside the discovery is better than observing it from the outside. Every day with the pack teaches me something new about community, loyalty, and what it means to belong somewhere. Marcus turned to face her fully, his hands settling on her waist with the possessive certainty that marked him as a mated alpha. And us? Do you miss the uncertainty, the chase, the question of whether we'd find our way to each other? Samantha smiled, remembering the woman who had walked into these mountains 12 months ago, driven by scientific curiosity and completely unaware that she was about to meet her destiny in the form of a man who could command wolves and corporate boardrooms with equal authority. Marcus Kane, she said, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. I spent 30 years of my life not knowing that I was incomplete. I spent 3 months studying apex predators without realizing I was looking for my mate. And I spent exactly 1 morning trying to maintain professional distance from the most compelling man I'd ever met. She kissed him softly, tasting wine and satisfaction and the promise of forever that had marked their relationship from the beginning. I don't miss the uncertainty. I don't miss the loneliness. And I definitely don't miss pretending that what we found together was anything less than the kind of once-in-a-lifetime love that people write legends about. Marcus's response was to pull her closer, holding her with a kind of fierce protectiveness that had characterized their relationship from their first meeting. Have I mentioned lately that you're the perfect mate for an alpha who spent 8 years convinced he was better off alone? Only every day for the past year. Good. Because I plan to keep saying it for the next century or so. As the sun set over the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus and Samantha stood together on their deck, watching their pack family celebrate another year of prosperity, growth, and the kind of unity that came from surviving challenges together. Dr. Samantha Cross had come to these mountains looking for wolves to study. Instead, she'd found a wolf to love, a pack to protect, and a life that was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. Sometimes the most important discoveries weren't the ones you planned to make. Sometimes they found you instead. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they came with fangs, supernatural strength, and the promise of forever in the arms of an alpha who understood that true power came from sharing it with someone strong enough to stand beside him as an equal. The Cascade Pack had found their perfect alpha pair, and the mountains themselves seemed to approve of the match. After all, the best love stories were the ones that changed not just the lovers, but everyone around them. Marcus and Samantha Kane were living proof that when apex predators found their perfect match, the entire world became a safer, stronger, and more beautiful place. The end.